If your remarriage feels stuck, stop blaming everyone else. It might be you. Hi, everybody. We are Mike and Brenda Baker, and today we're going to be talking about blended families. If you're not self-aware, you're the problem.
Okay, so when we're talking about blame, blame is a word that gets thrown around a lot. But are you self-aware of who that blame should be at? Is it you? Is it possible that it could be you? I mean, we've talked a few times about, if you have a consistent problem between 2 or 3 marriages and all of your partners are different, you're the same. Which means that maybe you're not very self-aware. So let's look at the definition of self-awareness. Self-awareness is the honest and humble ability to recognize your own thoughts, emotions, patterns, and behaviors and how they affect others. It's choosing to reflect before you react. Shall I reread that part? It's choosing to reflect on you before you react, and it's key to emotional and spiritual maturity in marriage. Psalm 139 verses 23 and 24 state, "Examine me, God, and know my heart. Put me to the test and know my anxious thoughts. And see if there is any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way." Meaning, Lord, please help me be self-aware. Please help me to know what I'm doing or not doing. Please help me to know that I may be the problem. So, yeah. So what that does is that brings us into our first point here. So self-awareness is the foundation of all growth, all right, in the blended family. We've talked a million times about all of the baggage that comes and, how there's this constant emotional button pressing. It's almost like there's a big panel on the wall, and I don't know, is it Dad's day to go over and just punch buttons? Or is it your day to just go over and punch buttons? Or is it the kids' day? The kids go over, they can't quite reach the buttons, so what do? They get a toy and they just beat on the buttons. And so, but the point here is, are we reflective of when it's us pushing the buttons?
Yeah, and so when it comes to growth, when we're early on in a marriage, it's very common to be in the honeymoon phase, right? Where everything is going well, and then all of a sudden, and it seems like in blended families, it kind of like all of a sudden, bam, it stops, and you're in real life. Now, you were in real life prior to getting married a lot of the times because you both, if you brought kids into the marriage, you were already parenting, right? You don't have that alone time with your spouse prior to getting married that you do before you have kids, right? And I heard this really cool way of diffusing situations that I want to bring up because I really believe that it would help in this situation. Simon Sinek, I hope I said his last name right. I heard him say that he and his wife would go back and forth if they would get in an argument. They would go back and forth and they would be telling each other what they did wrong. And he said that what they've realized is that the best way to fight is to come to the table when they're in an argument and talk about, tell their spouse what they did wrong in the situation, they themselves. And I think that would be such a great tool because if you can be self-aware enough to tell your spouse, hey, in this situation, this is what I did wrong. And this is kind of funny because Mike and I had a situation yesterday actually where I got really upset about something, but I was also upset about another thing, okay? And I don't want to go into what it was, but, I was way more upset than I needed to be. But I didn't have, because I was so angry, I didn't have the self-awareness to calm myself down and choose to be loving and just say, hey, that really hurt my feelings, whatever. Now, I didn't yell at him or anything, but I just was way more grumpy than I needed to be. And so we were driving in two separate cars, and so it gave me some time to think about, like, why was I really upset? And I think sometimes in blended families, we get into this situation, like what Mike was saying, those emotional buttons get pressed. And then we just kind of spiral from there, especially us girls. And so when we are self-aware, though, a lot faster than I was yesterday, we're able to really bring that in, look at ourselves, and then talk.
So it's important to remember the big panel I was talking about with all the buttons looks a lot like Jeopardy, where people have to look at it and they have to guess what the topic is about. Only on your buttons, on your panel up there, what it's showing is it's showing all of your past hurts, all of your past triggers, all of your past fear of rejection. They're all labeled up there. And what you think is that your spouse walks over there or your kids walk over there and they hit specific ones on purpose. In truth, the only person in the house who can see the titles of the buttons on that panel are you.
Yeah.
Because your spouse has the same panel. But you can't see those buttons until you've hit one and they tell you, hey, that is one of my buttons. So, the important thing to remember is you can't fix what you won't face. Okay, so because self-awareness is so vital, proper communication won't happen without self-awareness. Self-awareness is what's required for you to apologize, for you to say you're sorry, for you to stop playing victim, for you to stop blaming everybody else, for you to take accountability. All self-awareness. Remember, it says self-awareness is the honest and humble ability to recognize your own thoughts. Now, I think that most of us already recognize our own thoughts, but because we're mad, we push that aside. We know in the back of our mind that this is ridiculous. This is, what am I doing? Okay, but because we're angry, that justifies our negativity, and really what it does is it puts you in a position, or it puts your family in a position that because you won't deal with it, they suffer. I mean, I'll give an example, just a little bit of an example. Before Brenda's dad passed, he was notorious that when he was upset about something, he didn't even have to be upset with you, but he would treat everybody in the room like crap. Every time. I felt it was super ridiculous. Brenda felt it was super ridiculous. Everybody thought it was ridiculous, and it was because ultimately he was not, I think that's safe to say.
I would say.
Her dad was not self-aware. Now, when I say that, let me give a caveat. I have zero doubt that he knew he should not be doing that because we're adults. However, it had become a habit, and it was easier to continue in that habit than it was to say he was sorry and break the habit.
And I think another point to what you're talking about with my dad is my dad was a terrible example to our children as the grandpa.
I wasn't going to say that.
Hey, I'll say it. And so, in those situations, it really, because I am a lot like my dad. I'm sure that my mom gets overwhelmed sometimes because my dad and I are very similar, okay? I have tried to learn from my dad what qualities really hurt other people. And I've tried to minimize those things. Now, I'm not saying I'm great at it, but for the most part, I would say that I am more self-aware than my dad, but that's not hard, okay? I've got a ways to go still. But, the example you set for your children, all the children in the house, is very, very important. And I didn't write down the statistics, but if a father goes to church or if a father does something, the percentage of the children that will follow in his footsteps is very high.
It's tremendously high.
So when you talk about, or when you think about that, you fathers have such a huge obstacle sometimes if you're not being self-aware and you're teaching especially your sons, that flying off the handle and swearing and whatnot is the way to behave. you're setting them up for failure in their futures. Okay, so do you want your children or any of the children in the household to end up divorced like you and your spouse? Ask yourself that. If not, it might be time to look at yourself and go, that wasn't okay. If you have made those choices and those mistakes, we highly encourage you to go to your children, go to the children in the household and apologize and change your behavior. Because you cannot say, I'm sorry, and then go right back and do the same thing. Because I can tell you from personal experience what happens when a parent does that. My dad used to all the time. He wouldn't say sorry much, but he'd kind of be nicer, and then he'd go right back and do the same thing again. He never changed his behavior. So I learned to not trust men in general. And so it's an amazing feat that Mike has, it just speaks to the quality of person that he is, that I'm able to follow him and I want to, but I also trust him for the most part. I mean, not because of you, just because of me, but
Oh, okay.
you're like, what? No, I do. And yeah, so I'll just go. You say something before I dig in my hole.
So this brings us into number 2 pretty well. Number 2 is the danger of projecting your baggage onto your new family. So using the example of Brenda's dad, the point there is his wasn't a new family. They were married for how long?
Almost 50 years before he passed away.
Almost 50 years, and he didn't have. So don't think this is only for blended families in this case. This projecting happened within a marriage that lasted 50 years, and he would project it on everybody. Everybody. So imagine then what it's like for a blended family. A blended family with all of these extra things. You've got overcompensating with kids. You've got resenting your spouse's parenting. You've got feeling invisible. You've got lashing out with any particular reason why, because maybe you had a fight with the ex. Maybe your spouse had a fight with the ex. Mm-hmm. There's just all these things, and so you get in this tight little ball, and of course then it becomes a scoreboard issue because you won't be honest about necessarily what is yours and what's going on really. So self-awareness is absolutely vital. Like I said, communication doesn't happen without it. It just doesn't. Mm-hmm. But let me sidestep for just a second into something Brenda said about if you think you're doing that with your kids, to go apologize now. So we have always made it a policy within this house, even from when the boys were very little, that if we were wrong, we did lots of things wrong.
Yep.
We were not perfect parents. There's no such thing as perfect parents, so just stop it, okay? So we apologized constantly to the boys because that's what we needed to do. All right. If we did something, it wasn't. I mean, if we did something and it didn't work, we didn't apologize for that. Yeah. But if we did something and we truly saw that was the dumbest thing ever, and we had a couple of those moments where it was the dumbest thing ever, where you're like, I have no idea what we were thinking there, and we would sit the boys down and apologize. Now, why do I say that? Because currently, and you've heard me mention this because it's a hot button with me, the whole trend of parental alienation, the adult children 110% blame the parents as though they have something to apologize for. Now, it's happened to us, and I'm going to sit here and make a rather bold statement that if you make your apologies now, you have no apologies to make later. Because the example that you set for your kids isn't just for the kids now, it's for the kids when they're adults. It's for the kids when they have adult kids. It's for the kids when they have grandkids. They are watching you constantly. That's one thing we've noticed about all of our adult kids is they're watching us more now than they were when they were little. Okay, they're looking to the examples, they're asking the questions, they're trying to be the best version of themselves they can be. But when it comes right down to it, we can have that relationship because we made our apologies. Yeah. They know we love them, and we're on, not equal. When you're mom and dad, you're never equal with your children. And if you think you are, you need to read your Bible again. You're not. You're never equal with your children. but you can still be friends with your children when they're older.
Mm.
But be that as it may, self-awareness is absolutely vital to the apology portion. Now, this wasn't necessarily in our notes, but I think it's very important to note that you see the parental alienation trend happening, and I'm sure that you worry about it because blended families are more susceptible, yes. I would encourage you not to worry about it. If you conduct yourself in a manner that is Christ-like, you apologize when you need to apologize, no matter how hurtful it may be, if it happens to you, you will still be able to move, I think, more quickly in a clean conscience as to what your actions were, because regardless of what your kids do, you're still the one who has to stand before God yourself. Anyway, I digress. So, but it still has to do with self-awareness. Absolutely vital for self-awareness. So, self-aware people, they catch themselves early. Unaware people just continue to justify destructive behavior like
My dad.
her dad. And I'm not sitting here to just bash her dad. These are facts. The whole
It's
family
truth.
knows it. It's not like we're saying anything that anybody that knew him didn't know already. And he would actually half-heartedly joke about from time to time.
Ugh,
Okay?
that was infuriating.
But did you have something you wanted to add before
No.
we move on? Okay, so just remember, being misunderstood is painful, but being unaware of the role you're playing in the confusion is what keeps you stuck, keeps your family stuck. You need to realize that your lack of self-awareness could have the whole family stuck. Just your problem.
Yep.
Could inhibit relationships, could inhibit marriage, could tear down the whole house. Just your problems. Now imagine if both of you are doing that.
Well, and they say that 85% of people that divorce the first time get remarried.
Yeah. After they say they'll never do it again, they do, and that's within 5 years.
Yes, yes.
Within
And
5
so
years.
it's really important to make sure that you are doing your very best. You're going to make mistakes, your spouse is going to make mistakes, but parent together and be the example.
So when we say self-awareness, let me throw in yet another caveat. Self-awareness is, I'll say it if they say it. No, that's selfish and self-centered.
Yeah.
Okay, that's you wanting to hear that you're right before you have to say you're wrong. So don't do that, because that brings us to number 3. Self-awareness turns conflict into connection. The more self-aware you are, and the faster you're self-aware, which requires humility. And if you're not sure what humility is, take a look in Scripture. It's more than evident throughout the entire New Testament. It means more of Him and less of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And so, one of the best things you can do is admit it when you're wrong. Not 2 weeks down the road. Try to do it as quickly as possible. Because when your spouse sees that you are being humble, they're going to humble themselves, which it is their responsibility. I'm not saying it's your responsibility for your spouse to be humble because you're being humble, but you can set an example for your spouse even. Another thing too is always communicate without blaming your spouse. How we act is on us. What we choose to believe is on us. My life coach used to always say, the story you tell yourself is up to you, right? And so all of these things really come into play in this situation. And so the more self-aware you can be, the better you are going to do in your blended family. So stop trying to win those arguments and just lead with curiosity rather than trying to control whatever situation is going on.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that self-awareness doesn't have to be destructive.
Yeah.
Some of the things that, awareness lets you admit when you're wrong. It helps you communicate without blaming, and it helps you stop trying to win arguments, because nobody really wins an argument. You might think you did, but you just wasted 3 hours of your day. So, but here's the other thing. It becomes a tool for intimacy too. Mm-hmm. Now, we weren't going to hit on this directly, but let me tell you, let me take this moment. Self-awareness is also what's the word I'm looking for? Well, it's when you lay yourself bare before your partner. And I don't mean physically, I mean it's when you lay everything out. You will never ever hear us endorse separate accounts in a marriage
Nope.
or separate beds in a marriage. Or what that says is that you're taking that one flesh that God has made you and you're saying there are things you're not willing to share. Okay, now some will say, well, no, they can come sleep with me sometimes, or no, I'll loan them money. What do you mean loan them money? It's all your money, okay? So the point here is that in those instances you are withholding, all right? You are not leaving and cleaving, as Scripture talks about. The point there is to be self-aware, is to lay yourself bare emotionally, spiritually, and basically you're telling the other person, there is nothing I will not share with you. There is nothing I will not bear to you. There is nothing I will not tell you. Now, I'm not talking about if you get a birthday gift and you hit it up in the attic. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about past hurts should be exposed, all of them. When Brenda and I first got married, it was, and we've talked about this before, it was difficult for me to even go to the store to get in. I could be on my way home, and if I took 5 minutes longer than I normally did, I got the riot act when I walked in the door. Now, what's the difference? Most men would have just lost their cool and said, why don't you get off my back? That is not what I did. I recognized that something else was going on. And so I asked straight up, what is your problem with this? Why is this a constant issue? I should be able to stop and get a soda. And so basically it came down to her dad and her ex. Both caused serious mistrust issues in men, or in the person she was supposed to trust, who was male. And so her mind would automatically go to a place that if I was 5 minutes later, it must be because I'm having an affair. It must be because I'm meeting some girl. It must be because I'm stealing something. It must be because she can't trust me. All right? And so I would constantly remind her, what have I done that is untrustworthy?
Yep.
And I wouldn't yell at her. I just asked, what have I done that's untrustworthy? Well, nothing. And I would remind her, then you need to let that go. Because you cannot take an old behavior from somebody else and lay it across your new partner. You can't. All right? Some women will adamantly say every man cheats. That is an absolute lie. That is absolutely, unequivocally not true. Not true even a little bit. But because they've been hurt, they're going to take that lie that was a truth in one relationship or maybe several relationships, but they're going to lay it over every relationship after that. And so that's why we're talking about, when it comes to intimacy, which is where I was going with this, intimacy happens, because there's a huge issue with it nowadays. Intimacy happens when you give all of yourself, not when you hold parts of yourself back.
Right. And, another part of the issue when we were younger and I would just stress myself out, by the time he got home, I would be almost hyperventilating because I was so afraid. So it was rooted in fear, but it was also my mind. I'm an overthinker. And so if somebody says, used to be, I'm not like this anymore, but when somebody used to say, hey, I want to talk to you, I would freak out and have worst case scenario and think through every single thing I could possibly have ever done, even remotely wrong. And my mind would just go and go and go. And so that was a lot of the problem as well. So, if you're an overthinker, it's time to get that under control. You can do it. There are lots of supplements that you can take, but also prayer. Prayer is probably one of the things that has helped me the most. But I supplement for it too, because my brain just goes and goes and goes, and it doesn't stop. And I can be going this way and that way at the same time. So that's the dyslexic brain I'm learning. So anyways, anything else? Okay. So self-awareness isn't easy. We're not saying that it is. It does take work, but if you want a strong remarriage, it is absolutely not optional. And so take the time now, do the work, and your blended family is so worth it. So with that, we will see you again next time. Bye.